That brings us to cars.
Critical analysis and reasoning skills.
Yes.
Wow.
So
Okay.
and now I know this deserves its own, segment of facilitated sessions
Yes.
because in a way, this is, as we already discussed, our non-science section of the exam. So how do you help students approach these? We already talked about DITS passages from the psychological standpoint, but how do we help students approach these questions and passages?
Very good question, DJ. And again, for illustrative purposes, we'll have a very short passage here in facilitated session. Again, I have to always mention in our AME online course, we scaffold you up to the really long, intense, dense passages. The goal here, though, remember our 3 skills. Let's just underscore them again. It's foundations of comprehension, skill 1. So that means we want to have a strategy that allows us to pull out the key points. What are the key points that the author is trying to make in that passage? That's going to be one of the strong strategies, right? Second skill is reasoning within the text. So, reasoning, drawing some conclusion from the information that we say we understand from the passage. So, sometimes that reasoning might be understanding an author's argument and then drawing a conclusion from that argument. Let me say that again. Understanding the author's argument, foundations of comprehension, skill 1, and then drawing a conclusion from that argument, skill 2, reasoning within the text. So when we understand that structure, it allows us to read with more focused intentionality. Then lastly, skill 3, which is reasoning beyond the text. Reasoning beyond the text still requires you to understand what the author's point was. But now we ask you, based on that understanding, to make a decision about a new situation that was not mentioned in the text. That's the extrapolatory thinking. And so, therefore, the goal is, as a strategy for these passages, you must know the skills because that helps you consider how I'm going to be intentional about, 1, annotating what are the key points. And that has to be done efficiently. Once I understand what the key points are, and I can try to draw a little storyline around that as I'm going along, then I'm able to do the thinking skills, which is now draw conclusions from that and then extrapolate from that same understanding. That's what we're going to be doing.
So this active reading process. So within this active reading and linking it back to these learning skills, we're annotating the main ideas.
Yes.
We're predicting what the author's logic is behind this argument. And then we want to practice summarizing, even, like we talked about in the previous section, summarizing it in plain language, one sentence. Like, how are we able to communicate this author's argument?
Exactly.
And so we
And the practice around this, again, is so important because initially it takes time to do this. So we start out slow to master the process. And then we work on efficiency of time where we can execute the strategy and the skill. And that's a key piece that our scholars must make sure they're doing. But you can't do that just in a week or 2 before the exam.
Right. So you got to practice. So let's actually practice with this critical analysis and reasoning.
That sounds good. So we're going to bring up a passage here. I see there's a very interesting passage. Again, for the purposes of our discussion, we are focusing on some brief passages today in this session. So let's see where we are. I know I have an outstanding scholar right here with me.
So I'll read. Scientific progress often demand that researchers push ethical boundaries. In the 20th century, pivotal discoveries, organ transplant, vaccines, sparked debate over risk.
We got to stop right there because we're seeing that there's a focus on ethical. So that's a key component, right? And then all these discoveries noted that there was a debate over risk. So we already see this link between ethics and risk, right? You see that storyline that I'm talking about?
Right.
So let's go on and see what the author's point is about that main idea. What am I understanding about ethics and risk?
So critics argued that scientific curiosity could not justify risk. Supporters saw risk as justified by potential benefits.
Ooh, another dichotomy, right? Two schools of thought. Do the ends justify the means, right? So because there's benefit, does in fact risk, is that justified? Or no, just because you have scientific curiosity and want to explore everything, we don't know if that's a good outcome for risk.
Right.
So again, as you said, as you're going through, you make these very short summaries. And I recommend that you just circle, right? And then keep the story in your head, because too much writing takes time. Unless you are someone who can do that very efficiently with a few notes. It's capturing the quick summary in your head, but you got to hold that information as you now move forward. And that's a skill to practice. And we practice that because it's a behavior a lot of scholars aren't used to doing that. Continue.
Gotcha. Guidelines like the Declaration of Helsinki seek a balance. Voluntary consent, minimized risk, and recognition that eliminating all risk halts progress.
Well, here we have now a specific context. The context is Helsinki, and we're noting that a balance between what?
Between your voluntary consent, minimize risk, and recognition that eliminates all risk, halts progress, basically.
Exactly. So again, it's going back to the balance between, are what we're doing ethical? Is what we're doing ethical versus the risk, right? And the specific context here, we're given this Helsinki as it attempts to achieve a balance, a take-home point. Okay.
So scientific advancement and ethics exist in perpetual tension, with each generation redrawing the lines.
That sounds like a closing thought, almost like the key thought or takeaway point the author wants us to have, that there's a perpetual tension between advancement and ethics, or risk and ethics. Interesting, because risk is being associated with scientific advancement. Okay, so we have intentionally annotated selected aspects of this passage by annotation, just circling key points that we want to remember and that we are bringing out in our thought process through a storyline. Let's take a look at your first question and see how you do.
Which best expresses the author's thesis?
Oh, let me stop you right there. As soon as we say what's expressing the author's thesis, or the author's thesis or focus, right, or main idea, all of that is foundation of comprehension.
Right.
So sometimes just how they phrase the question lets us know which skill we're focusing in.
Now, when I finished that paragraph, I said scientific advancement and ethics exist in perpetual tension, with each generation redrawing the line. I summarized that just then with reading it the first time as, the tone of this author seems, in a way, neutral, right?
Yes.
And what I was going to ask you is, in those moments before we even get to the question, is that something that students should consider with, like, naming, the tone of the author,
Absolutely.
things of that nature?
Absolutely.
Because that brings us into question number one, basically.
Absolutely, because that is a way to begin to, as you say, create a short story that's meaningful to you that makes sense. Where's the author going with this? Because it may help you look at these options in a way that aligns with your thinking. If the author has, in this case, a neutral tone and is saying it's not one or the other, but they actually exist in a tension, okay, sometimes the tension can be healthy, not healthy, but there's a dynamic in there, right? So let's see which of these options might reflect that.
Okay. So A, never breaks ethics. B, ethics blocks.
Well, no, let's stop there. Did he say never break ethics?
No.
No, didn't say that at all. So we can impeach it.
Impeach. B, ethics block innovation.
Did he say that?
No. Not
We
at
didn't
all.
say it. So impeach it.
Yeah.
So I like to say, Mama said a half truth is a whole lie.
Because I remember blocked innovation from the passage, but I don't remember that being linked to ethics though.
And it wasn't so much block innovation, it was more of scientific curiosity, which revolves around innovation, may or may not necessarily be associated with risk. Some suggest that the benefits are in alignment with the potential risk. Others say, no, there shouldn't be a risk.
Right.
But there was never any discussion about actually, does ethics block innovation?
Right, exactly. But that could get somebody messed up.
Oh, absolutely.
On
Because
danger.
that's something we might try to interpret.
Right.
But there's the evidence there that suggests that.
Right.
Which goes back to when you said earlier, what's the tone of the author? If the tone is neutral and there's no evidence, then would that support blocking something because the author might promote ethics blocks innovation, right?
C, ongoing tension / balance.
What about that one?
That seems pretty close to what the tone of the author. So it's like an ongoing tension / balance. So that's like neutral. It's like right in the middle.
And what's the evidence of that from the passage without going back?
That the author basically said that there's this perpetual
tension. Exactly. And notice how I said without going back, which means that we're doing effective comprehension during the passage, right? Now, sometimes we don't understand everything or recall everything with meaning, but we should have that as a goal, because going back and forth to the passage for most scholars is not efficient. I've only encountered a few scholars where they can efficiently do that. Most spend more time than they need to searching for information. So we have to practice the comprehension strategies by reflecting every 2 sentences as we go through the passage and connecting it to a story. All right. So you're thinking C is a possibility so far.
C, yeah.
Like C is a possibility. Okay. What about D?
Risk irrelevant if consent. No.
No. Why no?
Well, the author used consent as one of those examples in the passage to almost in a way combat against, just because you have consent does not give you free range or free academic or research.
That's right. So with Helsinki, they talked about the balance between risk by making sure there's good consent in the process, right? So you're going to go with option C as your final answer?
Yeah.
All right. And do you believe this is a foundations of comprehension question based on, it's just ask you, what is the author's thesis?
Yeah, that's a foundation.
All right. So let's go through. Let's see how my detonator works. Let's do a little swipe. Detonator wants to work. And so you were correct, DJ. Congratulations once again. You are back in the saddle. And so it's foundation of comprehension, of course. It's a tension between progress and ethics, right? Which is exactly what he said in the closing sentence of that question. Question 2, role of guidelines like Helsinki. Oh, interesting. So the role of the guidelines now moves you toward, and that's a reasoning within the text, drawing a conclusion about what you understand with respect to the author's focus, but now applied to a specific context in the passage, reasoning within the text. Helsinki, what do you think?
Well, Helsinki was brought up in that particular portion of the paragraph that talked about the balance. Where we
the balance. What option goes to the balance? The least amount of information with thinking and testing skill. Balance. So the only option that has anything regarding balance, and look, it's balance and protection, is option B. And that was a key piece from the passage where it specifically talked about achieving a balance, right? So we know it doesn't halt all risky research. That's impeached because that's an absolute. But of course, we said there's not all risky research in this process. Legal immunity, there's not going to be immunity for everything. We know that. And then maximize curiosity. We said we have to be careful. Yes, science allows for curiosity, but not at the extent of some significant risk to those who may be involved. So you're feeling pretty confident that this is reasoning within the text, and the answer is B. You always wait to
I'm
see the
gaining
answer,
back.
huh?
Yeah, I'm
Just
gaining
like
it
every
back.
scholar would do, right?
Yeah.
And you are correct again. The answer is B, a balance between progress and protection, right? Reason within the text. Let's do one more and let's see what's going on with the author here.
Author suggest about future generations.
Stop there. Future generations. So now we're looking external to the passage. And that external to the passage now means that we're about to do an extrapolation or reasoning beyond the text. But remember, it's still based upon what we understand in the passage.
Right.
So we're supposed to understand in the passage from the author, his focus or her focus was supposed to understand what?
That there, as it pertains to future generations, this perpetual balance
Okay.
that it will happen in future generations.
Well, you gave me the full answer because first, from the passage, we're supposed to understand that there's a tension between ethics and risk.
Right.
Now, with that understanding, and then at the last sentence in the passage, the author stated, and he or she believes that will always be perpetual, right?
Right.
So we have that. So now the question is, will that apply to future generations? What options suggest that context?
C. Perpetual, continuing debate, ethics. That's
Continuing debating
this
ethics,
perpetual
right?
tension. So to me, that's the first answer choice that stood out.
Right, because abandon means that it's not going to continue on. It's not going to happen.
Right.
The author said it's going to be a perpetual tension, right? So it's the understanding perpetual tension between ethics and risk. Now we want to apply it somewhere else. So what would represent that? Well, we're not going to abandon it because then there would be no tension.
Right.
Not interested, there'd be no tension, right?
Right.
Harsher penalties, that's a difference from the balance, right?
Right.
So therefore, as we said, continuing debating ethics makes sense because that would be a healthy tension.
Right.
Wow.
And this also speaks to the tone that we had already defined after reading the passage the first time of the neutral tone that the author was taking.
And neutral aligns with, hey, let's have a debate about it.
Right. Continuing debate as opposed to will abandon or not interested or harsher penalties.
So you're feeling pretty confident about this one.
I am.
This is like when the MCAT blueprint is tight and right, then your level of confidence is very high. And let's see what happens once again. And look, Darren, you are correct. The answer is, it almost jumped off the page when it went up there. The answer is C, which is reasoning beyond the text. The debate will continue. Well, DJ, this wraps up the final section of the MCAT. We evaluated the 3 science sections and the 1 non-science section and looking at what are the specific skills that we must apply. Of course, for the science sections is foundational concepts and skills. For the critical analysis and reasoning skills section, it's only the skills. That's the non-science section. And now we have an idea of how much work it's going to be, but we can be successful, right, in using the blueprint.
So I think right here, since we're closing out our facilitated session, is to basically give the students a quick guide on how they can simulate this at home. And so one of the first things we talked about is use official AAMC passages.
Absolutely.
So we that there's some free resources, and we talked earlier about how AAMC is contracted with Khan Academy,
Yes.
and that this is an opportunity for students who may not have the funds to participate in some of the more expensive, question banks or tutoring courses, that they can access these free resources from the AAMC website. The second thing is setting a timer and do full untimed annotation on your first try.
Yes.
So, we want to get into this process of creating a system of, the annotation and the mapping, the critical mapping, but then we also want to do something where we're putting it on a timer because essentially, this is a timed exam. The third thing is review explanations, not just answers. Write out why distractors are wrong.
Yes.
So this is the very important and critical piece
Error
of our
analysis.
error analysis, right? What type of skill, what went wrong here? Was it a thinking? Was it a testing? Was it a content skill? So that's very important to pin when you're in your preparation phase. The last thing is study with a friend. Teach each other every section. So when you're doing that, you're studying with a friend, I'm thinking about how can I reteach this very complicated and granular level information to someone else and that they can fully understand in the the most plain English that I can do. And so when we talk about, our preparation, this MCAT section, it's teachable. It's a
Yes,
very
it is.
teachable thing. And we started with a wellness framework.
Yes.
We went into a structure, skilled, and strategy. And then now here we're closing our MCAT block
Execution.
with execution, with how we have to bring it all together. And so with that being said, we're going to wrap up. DT,
We're wrapping up the MCAT series
wrapping up.
for facilitated session. Wow.
And so, if we have these real breakdowns, and we already mentioned some of our free downloadable PDFs, worksheets that you can find on our website. So again, this MCAT section is we can go in many different directions and do deeper dives, but for the purposes of our facilitated session, I think that this was a good kind of capture of some of the most critical pieces to start your
Journey.
preparatory and start your MCAT prep journey with. So I'll have our expert facilitator bring us out and close our MCAT and give us some coming attractions for our next block of facilitated sessions.
Thank you, DJ. Well, to our scholars, we hope this facilitated session with an MCAT series has been very helpful to you. Remember, the key component is going to be start strong with your initial wellness plan. That's your anchor for success. Remember GPS, growth mindset, right? Remember purpose and relevance, keeping a sense of belonging, connection. That's going to be a great anchor for our success. Then we have to be accountable, DJ. We have to be accountable for the MCAT structure and skills. The structure and the skills are critical to laying out your strategy, and that's going to allow us to set a realistic MCAT plan with our wellness component as an anchor. And then lastly, we have to move to the execution phase, where you bring those two first areas together and we practice that regularly for success. This is what it means to actually have a true, excellent MCAT plan for success. It's not about any shortcuts. It's not about doing a prep program independent of your wellness plan and independent of the MCAT blueprint. The prep programs do not teach you those two areas. They expect you already have that, right? So look at the prep program as simply a review resource that you then add the MCAT structure and your wellness structure to. That's the big piece. And when we do that, we can be successful. Now, as we look toward our future facilitated sessions, we now will be preparing our scholars. You've completed the MCAT. It's time to get ready to prepare your medical application to medical school. So we will be looking at what we call the Medical School Admissions Plan, MSAP, your MSAP for success. See you next time on FS.
See you.